The Muslim Brotherhood.
It's kind of a 100-year plan, and
Correct.
we're 50 years in.
Correct.
What's the worst case scenario the next 50 years?
So Jordan just banned the Muslim Brotherhood. The UAE has banned the Muslim Brotherhood. Our leaders, for 2 pieces of silver, have sold out our basic values and our basic institutions. Qatar is giving more money to British education, to American universities, than any country in the world. It's to use. The Qataris are starting to fund people like Tucker Carlson.
We know that for sure.
Yes, we do. And because the radical left wants to get rid of Western hegemony, the Islamists who want to destroy Western hegemony have this bizarre common cause. We call it the Red Green Alliance, to destroy their own country, their own culture. And it's terrifying.
What would it take to make them start to listen?
We are sleeping through the revolution. It's time for us to wake up.
I know it's annoying when creators ask you to subscribe, but since I started, the channel's grown 10 times faster. If you don't sub, YouTube probably won't show you the next episode. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Hit subscribe. I've just been looking this morning at this file that was sent to me that's extremely scary about the Muslim Brotherhood and its entryism. Explain to me in very simple terms what all of that means.
Okay, so the Muslim Brotherhood, in a way, sounds like a benevolent, kind organization. But the Muslim Brotherhood is a reactionary social movement that began about 100 years ago in Egypt. And what the Brotherhood is, it's a fusion of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the European Nazi anti-Semitism and even Nazism, fused with a very reactionary, if not perverted, view of Islam. And the raison d'etre of the Muslim Brotherhood is to distance Israel away from Western democratic countries, to isolate it and destroy it and murder Jews around the world. And then, which is very important, to use anti-Semitism as a way to fragment and weaken the West. So get rid of the little Satan, Israel, and then get rid of the great Satan, the United States, and other great democratic countries in the Western world. This is the raison d'etre of the Brotherhood. So we're doing a book project. We've launched it in Washington and in the Rayburn building, which is the Congress, which is an important building in Washington, D.C. We brought experts from all over the world and from the United Kingdom, some really important scholars and counterterrorism experts. And we showed how the Muslim Brotherhood is entering into the United States and into Western democratic countries. They're here in the UK for sure. And their entryism is a way to their goals, to destroy democracy and replace it with a caliphate, to replace it with Islamic law. And as far-fetched and fantastical as it seems, their strategic goals are actually meeting with great success. And we've been sleeping through this revolution in the West, and it's time for us to wake up.
It's really quite scary. From what I can gather, it's kind of a 100-year plan, and
Correct.
We're 50 years in.
Correct.
And how are they doing? What are some of the points they've hit?
Well, think about it. If we take a step back, Qatar is a country. It's a tiny country in the Middle East. It has less than 350,000 citizens.
Oh.
Tiny country.
Yeah.
Qatar is giving more money to British education, to Canadian education, higher education, to American universities than any country in the world. So why would this tiny, wealthy country give so much money to Western democratic universities? And it's to use soft power to influence it. And the Qataris have a bay'ah. In Islam, a bay'ah is a spiritual oath to the Muslim Brotherhood. The royal family of Qatar follows all of the religious edicts, rulings, and fatwas of the Muslim Brotherhood. They basically represent the Brotherhood around the world. And we estimate that the Qataris are using up to $1 trillion in assets, $1 trillion, to use as soft power to buy favor in universities, in our media, in our political leaders, to further their goals and their agenda. So Qatar is at the forefront of basically representing the interests of the Brotherhood, which is basically to destroy democratic countries. So they're giving all this aid. Naively, many people think they're benevolent and they're doing wonderful work in funding our universities, but essentially they're changing the discourse in the West. So if we take a step back, Hamas, which is the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood, intent on destroying Israel and Western democratic countries. Hamas, which is anti-Semitic, but let's put that aside for a moment. They're anti-democratic, they're sexist, they want to subjugate women, murder gay people, and do away with religious minority rights around the world. Hamas murdered American citizens and British citizens on October the 7th. They kidnapped them. And amazingly, some of the best universities, the Ivy Leagues in the United States, Oxbridge in the United Kingdom, the University of London, are turning out some of the brightest, best educated young people, young citizens of democracies, and they're supporting Hamas. They're supporting anti-democratic, vulgar terrorists who adhere to a culture of death, who want to destroy democracy, who want to destroy Britain and France and Italy and Germany and Canada and Australia and the United States. And young people are being inculcated in this sort of red-green alliance of the radical left, which has dominated many of our best universities. And because the radical left wants to get rid of Western hegemony, the Islamists who want to destroy Western hegemony have this bizarre common cause. We call it the Red-Green Alliance. So our intellectuals, influenced by Muslim Brotherhood money, are teaching now the second generation of Western citizens to destroy their own country, their own culture. And it's terrifying.
I think a lot of people say, "Oh, that isn't happening," or I don't even know. I keep tweeting saying. So, for example, I retweeted something I saw this afternoon, or I suppose you call it reposting now because it's not called Twitter anymore. But I think his name's Iqbal Mohammed. I'm not sure he's an MP or something. Gosh, I should really know my facts actually. But he was up, on stage and saying it's not just in parts of Birmingham. That's not enough. We need the whole city and then the whole country. We need this. And I reposted that, and I was just like, guys, like you might say maybe, oh, that's just a minority. I don't know, but it's being spelled out for you here. What will it take to make people who are not already on, in our kind of circle, what will it take to make them start to listen?
So tragically, I think a lot of this conversation has been censored, and it's often censored. It's self-censorship. We're censoring ourselves, and we're censoring ourselves because this notion of Islamophobia, which was invented by the Muslim Brotherhood and the Iranian revolutionary regime, one of the things that we need to realize is that the Muslim Brotherhood and Iran and other anti-Western democratic countries, they know us. They speak our languages, they speak our culture, they know our ways of life, they know how our universities work, how our political system works, and often we know nothing about them. And I think in a way we really need to understand who the Muslim Brotherhood is, their ideology, their strategic goals, and what they have in store for us. And we have to distinguish between people who adhere to this reactionary ideology that want to destroy democracy, and Muslim citizens who are upstanding, good British citizens who want to live here in peace and be contributing members of our society. And there's a huge distinction. And it's a racism, if you will, of low expectations if we in the West cannot be critical of a social movement that wants to destroy democracy and speak for all Muslims. It's racism. They're a strong minority, but there's a vast majority of good and decent Muslims who want to get on with life and respect the other and respect democratic principles. And in fact, Jordan just banned the Muslim Brotherhood. The UAE has banned the Muslim Brotherhood. Saudi has banned the Muslim Brotherhood. The Egyptians have banned the Muslim Brotherhood. So Muslim countries, proud Muslims around the world, are getting rid of this perversion of Islam, this social movement that has a cult of death that wants to destroy and murder decent Muslims and Jews and subjugate women and kill gay people and destroy democracy. And yet, because of the hijacking of our university system, our young intellectuals and students are incapable of distinguishing between Muslims who believe in democracy and respect the other and Muslims who are basically fascist who have a cult of death. And this is our failure. So this canard of Islamophobia is silencing debate and making people afraid to be critical of this enemy within our society.
What if there is no separating? What if there is no separating two different kinds of Muslims in that sense, and that Islam is actually simply incompatible with Western values?
So I know this is a question floating around some of the discourse in the United Kingdom and increasingly in the United States, for example, and in other countries. Look, I think it's very dangerous, to be blunt. I think that, all religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they have traditions that are violent, they have traditions that are problematic, and over time, there's been coming to terms with some of the values and ideas in our cultures and our religions, and we make them applicable to living in a democracy with other people and other citizens. And that's very, very important. And there are Muslim traditions that have deep respect for the other. Unfortunately, there's a significant minority with power, like Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, who try to represent all of Muslims around the world, which they don't. And because of perhaps our ignorance, we lump everybody together. And that's a tragic mistake in terms of respecting Muslims, I think, and causing anti-Muslim behavior. And it's a stupid strategic choice because we need allies all over the world to struggle for our democratic principles. So it's a mistake on both levels. And I'd also like to say, for all sorts of reasons, I think we live in this sort of globalizing world governed by neoliberalism, neoliberal policies that came out of the time of Thatcher and Reagan. The neoliberals wanted to weaken the state. They believed if you weaken the state and allow free market enterprise to come into the economy, it will cause economic growth. And with economic growth, you'll have more democracy and more inclusion. And what we have found that when the state is weakened, there's fragmentation and marginalization. So the glue that holds society together through our national identity, through providing goods and services like healthcare and education and public transportation, is slipping away. It's becoming less efficient. And the Islamists, on the other hand, also want to destroy the state. So we have three, reactionary social movements: the radical left, the radical right, and political Islam, that's attacking the democratic center. And I would argue it's incumbent upon all of us to try to strengthen and reinforce the democratic center, its institutions, our cultural identities, our national identity, and to come together to fight, to defend our democratic societies.
Well, certainly I agree with respect to national identity and cultural identity. That's seen as a kind of far right thing in this country. I gather, I think you were born in Canada. Canada is more on the left, I think, a lot of the nationalism, isn't it? So it's just, it can move around, but it's sort of poo-pooed a bit here, isn't it?
I think the same discourse is in Canada too. And in Canada, we're also facing, I think, the entryism of the Muslim Brotherhood in our Canadian civic society, in our cultural institutions, in our mosques, in our parliamentary proceedings as such, is also advancing rapidly. So I think Canada and the UK have common tendencies, concerns, and issues. Yeah.
I think I take your point about Islam, of course, and that all the religious texts have violence and things we wouldn't do today. There are differences. I mean, one between Islam and Judaism, for example, is that Judaism is not an evangelizing religion, right? So that's why there's so few of us in the world, and half of us are secular anyway. Islam is the total opposite, and it's spreading quickly across the West, and it's taken over many, many countries that were either Christian or, just not necessarily Islamic. In none of those countries are you able to be gay. So it's not just a sort of fringe. That's why I'm trying to say it's not just a fringe kind of Muslim Brotherhood aspect. It's endemic to Islam, perhaps. At least Islam in the world today.
Yeah. Look, I think, to be blunt and honest, what you're saying is largely true. I think what you're pointing out to truths. As you were speaking, as you were speaking, I was thinking of what's happening in Mali now. Mali is falling to ISIS as we speak, funded by the Qataris. Sudan, there's genocide happening there, also funded by Qatar in many ways.
Nigeria,
the attack on Christians. Yes, I mean, there's profound issues sweeping the world, and radical Islamists are there, and they're a force that needs to be reckoned with. But so at one level I agree with you, but I would also say that the establishment in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, that are in bed. They're in bed with the Islamists, with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the Qataris. Before the Qataris, it was the Saudis. They were the address for radical Islam. Today, they're not. When President Obama was elected, the first thing he did was he went to Cairo and he invited the Muslim Brotherhood as his honored guest to sit in the front row of his first public speech. And they thought by engaging, in quotations, the Muslim Brotherhood, you can work with them. So we in the West have made significant errors in recognizing the most pernicious elements of the Islamic population, of the Islamic community. And we've made strategic mistakes to get into bed with them. And I think it's time that we work with, support, and help Muslims in Western democratic countries, and certainly Muslim nations like the United Arab Emirates, like Saudi Arabia, that's sort of changing as we speak, and engage with people who are true partners, not with Qatar. And the influence of Qatar in the British establishment and in the American establishment is profoundly disturbing to any of us who care about democratic principles and peace in our own society.
It's very scary. I wonder if part of what got us to this point is because I hear when you speak and you say, not to labor this point, I'm not going to go on about it the entire time, but I guess my feeling is that it's not just a fringe aspect. It's not just the Muslim Brotherhood. It is part of Islam today. It doesn't mean Islam couldn't be different in 100 years or so. This is what a lot of people are concerned is what got us into this place in the first place. We all have an urge to be the grown-up in the room. I have that urge. I always feel it. And I want to say, well, not all of the people, not all of the things. And I was always told as a child, for example, and you grew up as a Jew, you're always told like, hey, there's a threat out there. And there's a threat from the far right. And there's a threat from Islam as well, which we know. But I was always told, hey, it's only 1 in a million of terrorists. That's what my parents told me, to make me feel better. There's only 1 in a million. And then you find out, well, there's 40,000 jihadists on the watch list in the UK now. And those are just the ones we know about. And it's the percentage of Muslims in this country who are anti-gay, or the percentage, for example, in Pakistan of people and we bring in a lot of people from Pakistan, and I don't think they are necessarily that entwined with the Muslim Brotherhood, who have unfavorable views of Jews, is 99% in Pakistan. So do you get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Is there a time when, we can't be the adult in the room anymore because that's what let this happen?
Right. Look, I think you're pointing to, a real, I won't say problem, I think it's a real crisis, right? So I can't argue with you at that level. But I will say this, I think the leaders of Britain, of Canada, Australia, and other countries in the West have taken in refugees and immigrants without asking them what their views on democracy, on citizenship, on living with people from different communities in a new country. And there should be tests. The Germans finally have initiated a test for people who want to become citizens or emigrate to Germany. They have to believe in democratic way of life. And I think that the fact that we've allowed people into our democracies who are anti-democratic and hate the United Kingdom and hate many of the citizens here is a problem. But it was political expediency because the establishment in this country worked with the most pernicious elements of the Islamic world. And I'll say this, just to, maybe try to challenge you a bit. When I go to synagogue in Florida, or I have family in the United States, or in Canada, or in the United Kingdom, I am met with people who are heavily armed with this serious security in place because of the threat of anti-Semitism in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and it's now around the world. I was recently in the UAE, and I was invited for Shabbat dinner to the rabbi in Dubai. And I'm always a bit late, as you know. And it was Shabbat, and on Shabbat you can't, use telephones or ring the bells and things like this. So I went to the rabbi's home for Shabbat, and I was late. So on the Sabbath, I couldn't ring the bell out of respect to him. And I was outside this walled gate, and I was knocking on the gate, and nobody heard me. So after 5 minutes or so, I worked up some courage, and I opened the door, and I went into the courtyard. And then I went up to the home of the rabbi. It's his home and synagogue in the same building. I was knocking on the door. Nobody answered the door. And after another 5 minutes, I worked up the courage. I opened the door. I walked into their home. To my right, there was a religious service for Shabbat going on. And the dinner in his home was the room on my left. No security. Nothing is locked. And people are living in freedom. It's extraordinary. And I was in Saudi Arabia a couple of times, and the treatment and the respect I received as being, I'm also Israeli, and being Jewish, was remarkable.
Mm.
So there are
Yeah,
parts of the world that are engaging in reform. And it seems to be getting significant traction deep in the societies. So on the one hand, places that were the source of terrorism and the horrible things that we're discussing, I think are really trying to reform the societies and get rid of the people who hate and live with this sort of cult of death. And we in the West are taking members of the Muslim Brotherhood through Turkey into Europe, into the West, and our leadership here has failed us. So I would say, for Muslims or anybody who's immigrating to Western democratic countries, they have to have a pledge of allegiance to our principles, to our values, and to become good citizens. And I think it's completely possible that the vast majority of Muslims or anybody would be contributing good citizens in our countries. But our leaders, for 2 pieces of silver, have sold out our basic values and our basic institutions. And to me, this is the crime of what we've done to ourselves in the West.
I take your point, and I keep hitting, and that is something that fills me with some optimism, because I'm so pessimistic now. I'm so depressed about this whole thing, and I do keep hearing, oh, hang on, in the UAE, look what they're doing, and those kinds of places. But think of the authoritarianism they have to implement just to keep Islamic extremism under control there. We're never going to do that here, nor would I want us to. So I'm not sure it's at all possible we can ever replicate that.
Yeah, we live in a democracy, and I'm sure we both agree we have to safeguard those profound, amazing values that we are so fortunate to be citizens and to live with. But yes, I think, in a way, I just told a colleague, I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish because my mother's Jewish. I was born Jewish. I didn't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I was born into this. To be a citizen in a democracy, we have a choice. And I think every generation of citizens have to get together and rise up in a way and protect and expand our democratic principles. And I think for too long, a generation or two, perhaps of our leaders, and many of us have been, distracted. We have not stood up to defend our democratic principles. And the encroachment of anti-democratic politics on the extreme left, on the extreme right, and the radical Islam that's here in our societies is really a challenge to our democracy. And it worries me. But I think those of us who care about democracy have to push back the extremists and just reinvigorate our institutions and our values and stand up for democracy. And, I'm wearing a poppy. We should remember.
Yeah.
We should remember the generation that really defended democracies against totalitarianism, fascism, and communism. And I think we have to remember those lessons. We really need to stand up to this challenge of totalitarianism, which is anti-democratic. It's anti-democratic. It's anti-British. It's anti-American. It's anti-Canadian. And we have to stand together with all of our citizens and rededicate ourselves to those principles that, the generation sacrificed so much to allow us to be here. And it'd be horrific if we allow this to slip away.
The only thing with democracy is there's a word, I'm just trying to look for it, in a Muslim word or Arabic word, I believe, for taking a country through democratic means. And that is what might happen. And I think that many expect to happen in the UK, whether in 10, 20 years or in 50 to 100 years. What is your outlook, this report that you've got, we're 50 years in to this entryism, Muslim Brotherhood. What's the sort of worst case scenario the next 50 years?
So the Muslim Brotherhood set out the strategic goal. It's a 100-year plan. And as I said earlier, their goal is to move Israel away from Western democratic countries, to isolate it and to destroy it, and to murder Jews around the world. October the 7th was an example of their strategic goals. Yosef Qaradawi, the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood, preached his entire life that the true Muslim is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. Right? The true Muslim obligated to complete the work of Hitler. Yosef Qaradawi was brought to the United Kingdom by the establishment here, by Corbyn, by Livingston, by Corbyn, by Livingston and Galloway. He was welcomed into the royal establishment, into Oxford. He helped to create Islamic studies at Oxford University, brought into the British establishment 30, 40 years ago. Their goal is to destroy Western democracy with entryism. And their strategic goal 50 years later, right under our noses, is having tremendous success. They're in Oxford, they're in Cambridge, they're in the Ivy Leagues. They're turning out students who hate democracy, who hate the United Kingdom, who hate Canada, who hate America. Students marching in the streets of London, of Paris, of Toronto, of New York, assaulting citizens. We had acts of terrorism here, of murder in a synagogue not too far from here. Murder of a synagogue in Manchester not too long ago. This Islamist ideology has been accepted into our society, and it's infiltrating, and we need to be aware to map the infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood into our best institutions, into our communities, into our mosques, into parliament, into our political leadership, and root it out. This is an anti-democratic cancer, but we must distinguish between Islamists who are trying to take over and destroy our country, to destroy democracy, and Muslim citizens who are law-abiding, who are decent, who have profound respect for their neighbors and want to get on with their lives. And I think if we don't make this distinction, we fall into the goal of the Muslim Brotherhood that wants to fragment and weaken our society. If our society becomes fragmented, if we start attacking each other, if British citizens or American citizens start fighting with each other, the Muslim Brotherhood wins. This is their strategic goal.
The problem for me is, so I also as a Jew grew up around near to a lot of Haredi or Hasidic Jews who are a strange people for those who don't know them, and I'm careful with my words because they sometimes seem to watch this and get angry at me if I'm, which is mad because they're not supposed to be watching the internet, but fine. But I feel like I and a lot of other Jewish people who have known of them, and people don't realize there's a huge gulf. Like we don't interact with one another. It's like a Christian and a Jehovah's Witness, for example. It's that kind of difference. But we know of them and we know about them. And I know that they operate under a law unto themselves. It's a different law about marriages and divorces and women's rights and how they educate their children, and they do all sorts of things to flout the Ministry of Education and those kinds of the rules that they're supposed to do. So it's, if you were to say to me, right, you've got to go into Stamford Hill where we have a lot of Hasidic Jews, and okay, well the law-abiding democratic, and they can stay, but the other ones can. Well, how would you even begin to know where to start with that? It's the ideology. Most Jews are not religious in that way, but most Hasidic Jews are. Islam is another beast. I mean, it's much more extreme than Hasidic Jews in terms of a propensity towards violence and evangelizing. We have the issues we've had with the grooming gangs, and there are millions in this country instead of tens of thousands. So I just feel I feel lost, and I'm going, how would you even begin with this?
So I'm going to push back at a philosophical level, if I may.
Sure.
One of the philosophers that have influenced me is Emmanuel Levinas. I don't know if you know Emmanuel Levinas. So Emmanuel Levinas was born in Lithuania. His family was from Lithuania. He was doing his doctoral studies in France during the time of the Holocaust. His family was entirely exterminated by the Nazis.
Hmm.
He survived because he was in France, and he became this very important philosopher. And he took Jewish thought to the university. And he taught from the Pirkei Avot, from the ethics of the Talmud, that the moment we see our face in the face of the other, we're human. The moment we see our face in the face of the other, we're human. So in other words, we need the human, in other words, we need the other to be human. So if I'm racist, I say I don't like African people, I've eliminated 1 billion opportunities for me to be a human being. If I'm sexist, I've eliminated more than 50% of my possibility to be human.
Sure.
So if we don't accept the other, we harm ourselves. Very different than tolerance. So we believe that we're all created in the image of God, and we all come from the same source, and we need each other to be human. We need each other to live in a democratic country. There has to be a deep social contract. And I think that if we start to live in a community or into a society which does not accept people who are different, like Jews who are different than those Jews, or Muslims who are a bit different than those Christians, or those Christians are a bit different than the Hindus, and they're different than the secularists, and the working people are different than the intellectuals in Oxbridge. We lose something that's integral and fundamental to being human.
But isn't there a fundamental nuance and distinction there? Because you're talking about when you say about I don't like Africans, or not the, I mean, in the hypothetical of I don't, or women say, we're talking about immutable features. And I feel like one of the places we've gone wrong in the last few decades is we have somehow completely lost sight of the difference between immutable features and harmful ideologies. So yes, I agree with you. Of course, we mustn't forget the human. And of any ideology. If a Scientologist came over here, they can have dinner with me. Jehovah's Witness, a fundamentalist Mormon, come have dinner, enjoy my hospitality. We can be friends. Of course we can. If 5 million Scientologists were immigrating to this country and they were mostly siloed into their own parts of the country, I'd go, gosh, we've got a bit of a problem here. They're still human beings. Of course they are. But their ideology, we're in trouble.
So this brings me to another thinker, Charles Taylor, who had the privilege to study with at McGill. He's a philosopher, and he really came up with the notion of multiculturalism. And this is why I did my doctorate at Oxford on issues of multiculturalism. But I think, the real model of multiculturalism was basically, showing how in the privacy of our home or in our temples, we have more freedom to do what we want, to practice what we want. When you're in public, in a democracy, you have to adhere to other guidelines and laws and rules and regulations and norms. And and he made the distinction of what you do in your private life and in your public life. But you may have more freedom in your home or in your temple than you do walking down the street or in your workplace. But at the end of the day, we live in a democracy, and a democracy is based on laws. And all citizens must obey the laws. So if the people of Stanford Hill have odd traditions or practices, or they wear clothes that nobody would wear in Soho, or the people in Soho wear clothes that nobody would wear who live in Manchester or in Leeds, okay, these are acceptable differences, but we all have to abide by the laws, even if we're different, even if we come from different backgrounds or cultures or classes. We all have to adhere to the law, regardless of our background, of our religion, or our language, or our class.
But they don't, do they? They don't abide by the law.
Well, those who don't obey by the law need to be punished.
But this goes back to my earlier point, I think, about the difference between us and the UAE is that we're not authoritarian enough to be able to track people in that way. We don't want people's phones and messages to be tracked. We don't want the police in our homes. We don't want any of that.
We don't want that. But when the establishment takes billions of dollars from Qatar. So for example, we did one study, we found 1.3 billion with a B dollars that the Qataris gave to the university in Texas A&M, which happens to have a nuclear research lab in Los Alamos. They gave $1.3 billion to Texas A&M. They funded 504 research projects. We fought for years to get access to this contract, which is supposed to be public in the United States. And we discovered of the 504 research projects, Texas A&M gave all the intellectual property rights to the Qataris. 58 projects were military-based projects, and 13 have dual use for military nuclear research. They gave the IP to a country that has good relations with Iran, with the Taliban, and with ISIS. But the establishment in the United States approved it. And the same is happening to Oxbridge and the best universities, King's College, Oxford, Cambridge. They're taking money from billions of dollars from entities, from countries and foundations and individuals who fund terrorism, who want to destroy democracy.
This is a huge problem. It
Huge
keeps
problem.
me up at night. This is really scary.
Yes. So we can look at the people in the strange communities that are violating laws, but we are in bed with the people who want to destroy us. And we're selling the most important institutions in our society, the institutions that actually teach young people how to be citizens. We're taking money from people who want to destroy us. So it's no wonder that we're ill-equipped to make distinctions between good citizens in our democracy and dangerous citizens in our democracy. So if our leaders are taking money from nefarious sources who want to destroy us, to me, this is the cause of the problem. And it filters down into our society to the point where you see we have 40,000 people that the security forces of this country need to keep tabs on. And if they don't, terrible things are going to happen. And I'm telling you, if they're following 40,000, we know from the experts that I work with today that the techniques to make somebody into an extremist, to help push somebody over the edge to do a violent act, the methods are very sophisticated. It no longer takes years or months. It can take a week. It could even take days to get somebody to do something terrible. And yeah.
And so we're in trouble. I mean,
we are.
But
it's a real crisis.
If I'm the Muslim Brotherhood and I'm paying all of these organizations and institutions and things, I would then see as probably our most beneficial asset the concept of multiculturalism. I would say how wonderful with these people. I would be pushing that. I would be using that in the education system, which they are. So that's why I'm looking at it and I'm going, guys, multiculturalism was a lovely idea, and I loved that idea. But communism was a lovely idea in some respects as well. And I suppose you could even, I mean, I'm sure Hitler thought Nazism was also a lovely idea.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like, hey, we're all the same and we're going to be this super race and all of those things. They're all lovely ideas that sound good in the moment. And then decades later, you go, I was thinking about this the other day. It's amazing how our most intelligent people come together with an idea. I think of China's one-child policy, where they go, this is the way to do it. And nobody in that situation thought, 20 years down the line, we might be in a situation where we have an aging population we can't support, and we're going to have to get rid of them. I just can't believe. But at the time, it sounded like the only way. They had a huge population. What do you do? Multiculturalism, lovely idea, and except we denigrate our own culture. Then, if we are only identified by our own who we're not.
I would argue this is not the original notion of multiculturalism, but I think the multiculturalism that you're describing is part of our current reality, which is a tragedy. I think it was a good idea that it's been twisted and has been weaponized.
That's what they say about communism.
Yes. So I at one level, tragically, I can't disagree with you. But we also have to, I think, turn our gaze to the radical right. The Qataris are starting to fund people like Tucker Carlson and
do we have evidence of that? Because I keep wondering that about Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, he's actually registered. He has a company that's registered and they're getting funding for the Qataris, so that's established.
Do we know that for sure?
Yes, we do.
Because with Candace, I feel like she's just a bit nuts and ideological.
Yeah, her husband is interesting. I think he's an extreme kind of I don't know. Okay. I don't know enough, but yeah.
Her husband was born a woman, wasn't he?
Oh, that's what
Candace's husband, I think, was born a woman. That's a joke before she comes and sues me.
Yeah.
But
that should be the topic of our next interview.
Was Candace Owens' husband born a woman? I think so.
I've been reading about that.
Yeah, I've heard that. I don't know. I'm just asking questions. Tucker Carlson, though, there's videos where you see a complete 180 on everything he said. Yeah,
so amazing. So he is being funded by a Qatari entity, and he's registered. His company's registered on Faro, so there's money from Qatar coming to him, and he's appealing, in my view, to the extreme right. He's weaponizing anti-Semitism and I think some really dangerous ideas, And he's appealing to young people who are often marginalized and disenfranchised. And in the United States, many of these marginalized, disenfranchised young people are frustrated socially for all sorts of reasons. And they also carry guns. And the threat, you're worried about 40,000 radical people in the UK. I don't know how many thousands of people are now being made into more extremists by the rhetoric from social media, from Nick Fuentes, from Tucker Carlson, and from that whole ecosystem. Piers Morgan has been, putting.
Well, at least he sort of does do both sides,
Yeah, but he's, in my view, normalizing really horrific ideas. But I'm afraid of sort of lone wolves with young, marginalized, frustrated men in the United States who are being empowered by this horrible hate, and they're armed, and they're gonna do stuff. And so
At the same time, I can understand why Americans want to be armed with what's going on, because I often sit in my house and I think every Jew in the UK, probably in the States, Canada, Israel, and now, since this has become a larger problem, certainly people outside of Jews, most people who watch this show are not Jewish, they're white, British, and they're sitting there going, at some point, maybe not today or tomorrow, but in the coming decades, there'll come a time now. And we're talking about Islamism, and maybe it's only political Islamism or it's the extreme side. But people are now, for the first time in my life, they're all going, gosh, I wish I were armed because they might come to my house.
Look, if talking about anti-Semitism, you're talking about the white British audience that you have.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about anti-Semitism a lot. Professor Elie Wiesel, who I had the good fortune of working with and knowing in my lifetime. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote this famous book called Night and was a witness to the Holocaust. He always taught that anti-Semitism is not a parochial problem for the Jewish people. That when anti-Semitism begins, it may begin with the Jewish people, but it basically starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews, and it attacks our society, our humanity, our decency, and our institutions. So the attacks on the Jews in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in the United States should really alarm people who care about the safety of our societies, of our democratic societies. Yeah.
They're next. I strongly believe that. With Tucker, is it just that we know that he's getting paid and that's it so far? It must be a lot of money because he must be pretty wealthy.
Yeah, I don't know how to explain this flip. It's staggering and it's dangerous. And then, so that's the extreme right. And then, of course, we have Mr. Mamdani, who was an SJP, Students for Justice of Palestine, organizer at Bowdoin College in Maine, in this fancy liberal arts college in the forest of Maine. His father was a big professor at Columbia University. Students for Justice of Palestine comes out of AMP, American Muslims for Palestine. AMP is the Muslim Brotherhood. So you have now the second generation of highly educated, the best universities, of smart, charismatic young people who are now changing the discourse from the radical left, radical Islam, the radical left on the one hand, and you have the Tucker Carlsons and the right-wing extremists on the other hand. And the center is really being attacked. And now, we're talking about people wanting to be armed in the United Kingdom. New York City was a Jewish city, right? It was the biggest Jewish city in the world. And now you have people there. The conversation is, do we stay or do we go in the great democracy of the United States? Because an Islamist, a Jew hater, a person who hates democracy, a person who hates the United States of America is now the mayor of a very powerful city. Him and his friends, and they're smart. They're going to take a step back and they're going to entrench themselves and get organized, and then they're going to take the next step. And we are sleeping through the revolution.
It feels like there's always maybe this is what I often read about, a kind of, when you are on the left and you're from a kind of pro-immigration and pro-multiculturalist background, or that's what, it's then when you are on the left, you are incentivized to bring in more and more people from other countries because they're going to vote for you. Is that what we saw with Mamdani? And was that an Islamist vote? And also, I mean, there's a very liberal contingency in New York of Jews who, would probably have voted for him as well.
Correct. Yeah, there's some opinion polls that are roughly 20-odd percent, 22% of Jewish people in New York voted for him. And if it's accurate, I would imagine that young Jewish people voted at a much higher level.
Sure.
Because he's appealing. He's appealing to people who are frustrated, people who can't get flats or apartments in the city. Life is expensive in New York, and people are marginalized and frustrated. And people spend 90,000 dollars a year to go to a good school, and then they graduate, and they have huge debts to pay, and they're running. They get good jobs in Manhattan. They work 60 hours a week, and they don't have enough money to have their own flat. So you have these, highly educated young people, having a room in a flat in Brooklyn and further away from Manhattan. It's frustrating. So again, the marginalization is really feeding into this vacuum of our democratic institutions and our economy that's failing us.
I
So,
think one of the places that we need to do better in all of the West is, and I keep going on about this actually, is that it's the celebrity class, because there's a reason brands pay those guys so much money to put a watch on or to drink some whiskey, So we don't like to admit it, but even the reality TV show people from these like Selling Sunset or whatever, the Big Brother, they have more influence than many politicians, and politics is downstream of culture. We had one guy here called Rylan, who is very much a kind of reality TV show guy with the sort of fake white teeth and all the hair, all that stuff, and he's got a big Essex accent, and he seems like a nice fella. But he came out with something on TV the other day. He said people are worried. People are worried about immigration changing their lives and so on.
yeah.
He's not been seen since. But I think if we change, if we can start to allow, and that's partly what I'm trying to do with this show as well, occasionally get someone from that mainstream world here and have a decent conversation with them and try. But how else can we start to? Is it just an uphill battle? Can we fight back against this kind of Qatari influence? Is it going to be impossible?
No, I don't think it's impossible. Again, I'm wearing this and I'm thinking of what, the generation of British and Canadian and American and all the people really got together and paid such a profound price with their lives to defend democracy. We have to remember their lesson. And if they could save democracy, I'm sure, the threat is not as great as it now as it was then, but it is a threat. It is a threat. I just think we need to distinguish between the threat to our democracy in an intelligent way and fight back to defend it. And I think we have allies throughout the United Kingdom, throughout democratic countries, and throughout the world. I think actually countries around the world are turning to the West and saying, they're also in third world countries, in the Middle East, in Mali, in Sudan. They're being victimized by this cult of death at a tragic rate. And this hate is spreading around the world. And we need to, in the West, stop taking short-term gain, taking money, a lot of money from Qataris and other horrible people, from the King of England to Oxbridge to the Ivy Leagues to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the United States. We need to stop taking these people's gifts because they're out to destroy us. And we have to think long-term, not short-term, and surround ourselves with allies of democratic principles and fight back. And yes, I started coming to the United Kingdom, to London in 1986 as a student at UCL. And I've been walking around the streets in the last few days I've been here, and the change is profound. And it's London is this incredible international city, and we should never lose sight of the value and magic of being in this incredible city. But you can also see there are sectors of this city that are antithetical to what the great city of London was and is and must be. And so, but we have to, I don't think take a hammer, but take a surgical knife perhaps and root out the cancer.
Well, the immigration process, I think, has to stop tomorrow or yesterday. That's got to immediately stop. Refugees, I don't know what you do with refugees, and what someone said to me recently was refugees should be going to places on the same continent, so there's a similar culture, so we take Ukrainians and so on, and people in Palestine or Gaza or Syria or whatever should be going to countries in those kinds of regions. Unless everybody's playing ball, it doesn't really make sense, does it?
Yeah, look, I think we need to take, again, if you want to come to a Western democratic country, I think you have to be the type of person who wants to live in a democracy. And all of what that implies. That means respecting the fact that in democracy, all citizens are equal under one legal system. Men and women, straight people, gay people, rich people, poor people. We're all equal under the law. And if immigrants don't accept it, I don't think they have a place here.
Yeah, but that means we have to make some quite draconian changes right now.
We need to make changes, yes.
I was asked by, or it was suggested to me by our mutual friend Ali Tabrizi, with whom you spoke recently, that I ask you about a moment you were in a hotel room and you discovered lots of things. Does that ring a bell?
No. Sounds like it must have been interesting.
It must have been great. He said when you were discovering the Qatari influence, he said make sure to ask him about this.
I wasn't in a hotel, but yeah, I was in so I was in my flat in Palo Alto, California. So I was running a research center at Yale University, and it was closed in a very odd way. There's usually a process that institutes are closed, and it's very rare that it's closed. And we were running a successful institute, and it was closed down and everybody was fired. And then I went off to Stanford University, and I finished writing a book late at night, and I was late with my deadline, and spent weeks not sleeping properly and, working, pulling all-nighters till I finished the book. And I finally sent off the manuscript, and I was wired, and I was looking at the internet, and I was looking at hockey scores and reading newspapers. And I came across an email from a gentleman named Charles Hogan. And Charles Hogan was the vice president of Yale. And he was very antagonistic to the work we did. And he was, I would say, and I don't use the word lightly, he was an old school anti-Semite.
Okay.
To his soul, to his core. So Charles Hogan was working for a pharmaceutical company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I Googled the company. It was owned by the Ben Mahfouz family. Ben Mahfouz had a chemical factory in the Sudan that the Clinton administration attacked because they were building weapons for terrorists. In a very short period of time, I found all sorts of connections of Muslim Brotherhood money and terror finance money going to Yale, going to universities in the United States. And this led me on this rabbit hole. And I do social theory and philosophy, and I was reading all this stuff, and I found all these connections in just about an hour. And I didn't know if this was my imagination gone wild or this was the tip of an iceberg. And I brought it to professors and experts on counterterrorism and terror financing. And two of these leading scholars were like, yes, we know this institution, we know this family, and yes, this is a tip of an iceberg. So what I did, my parents have a retired forensic accountant as a neighbor, and I told him the story. So he volunteered and worked with me for many years. And I have a friend who's also a scholar on the Muslim Brotherhood. And the three of us, without any budget, spent 7 years researching the illegal entry of money into American universities. We found $3 billion. I ended up, it's a long story, which I won't bore you with, but I ended up presenting our findings in Washington in front of 100 top civil servants, including the head of Homeland Security, the Attorney General, the head of the FBI. We presented our work. The federal government launched an investigation, and they found tens of billions of dollars of illegal money coming into American universities. The Biden administration called off the investigation as soon as it was in power. And because of our success, we were able to raise money and build a team of experts. And now we're about 25 experts who are experts of the Muslim Brotherhood, anti-Semitism, and terror financing. And we've done 15 reports since October the 7th in the United States on higher education and the buying by the Qataris and the Muslim Brotherhood of our education system. We've done 2 reports on Canada. We're coming out with a major report on the United Kingdom. We've done a report on Australia and South Africa, and we're exposing this network of up to $1 trillion of assets where the Brotherhood is using the Qataris to use soft power to take over our government and our institutions. And this is the work we're doing.
It's amazing work you do. I've got one more question for you, but where can people find some of your work and or get in touch or anything like that?
Okay. Well, Albert, so first of all, Ali Tabrizi is an amazing social
content creator.
Yeah, wonderful. He's just started working with us, so we're blessed to have him.
Oh.
And the work, you can see our work at our website, which is www.isgap.org. All of our reports are there, and they're available for free. And people are welcome to read and to engage with us anytime.
It's a really important resource, that is, for people writing about this
Thanks.
kind of thing. So I hope people will go there. We'll have a link down below.
Cool. And also, we have a small program at Cambridge University. We run a center in the Wolf Institute, and we have some academic programmings there. And I'm affiliated with St. Edmund's College at the university. So we have a small network of scholars really engaged in this type of work as well.
Good. I hope people will check all of that out. Who's a heretic you admire?
Who's a heretic I admire? Good question. I'll end. So there was this professor who influenced my life. His name was Shengia Rogers Raghavan. He just passed away last week at 94 years old. Shengia was a political activist. I was very active in the anti-apartheid movement because of Shengia. Shengia was one of the founders of the Black Consciousness movement. He taught Stephen Biko, and it basically was under house arrest and was exiled to the United Kingdom. And he came here as a refugee and ended up studying in Cambridge and Oxford, and was a teacher here. And to make a long story short, I met him. I grew up in the suburbs of Montreal, and we met in Montreal. And he told me, you should go to Oxford. And when he told me this, I actually looked behind me because I didn't believe he was talking to me. But he literally took me to the library, I didn't know what a scholarship was, and he kind of, led me to the UK, to Oxford, and really had a profound influence on my life, the direction of my life, but also on ethics, on how we have to defend democracy and pursue justice and respect all of the people around us in our lives. He was a very ethical, spiritual guy. So he just passed. He led a really impactful life, and he was somebody that was a heretic, exiled from his country, but an amazing ethical, spiritual guy who influenced many people.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah, well, he led a long, impactful life, and it was a rich life. And
Okay.
Yeah, good example of how we should live.
And a great heretic.
Yeah.
People, please go follow Charles Asher Smalls. We'll go look at Ali Tabrizi, because he set this up, and he's great, and he's working with Charles as well. Go to isgap.org as well, because this is really important. That's where you're going to find we have the discussions here, but you're going to find all the actual information, the stats, and all of those things on isgap.org. We'll have it in the link down below. Hit the like button and keep watching this channel.